okay, Tom, let's go next. So
Okay.
you said, all right, I Kirby'd it up.
Yeah.
You got your name out there. They're like, okay, he's the Kirby guy. So we're going to do a book called Godland, right? And so how does that happen? How do you hook up with Joe Casey, and how's that?
Well, that was like I'd been talking to Eric Larson, and he was actually trying to help me like get Myth of Eight Opus at Image, like turn it into an Image book, and like what I would have to do with it to make it an Image book. So, we kind of talked about that, and I done some things with it, and it ended up not coming to pass or whatever. And then a year or two later, he found himself as the publisher at Image or CEO or whatever, like that rotating chair that has since become like Eric Stevenson's chair for I think maybe 10, 15 years at this,
Right.
tenure. But like Eric Larson had that chair. And so then he said, he had like some ideas of like run Image in a different way that Image hadn't been run before. And he said he was trying to sort of like pair artists and writers, or just like pair, try to like make connection. Like, and so he had been talking, he'd been talking to me with like the 8 Opus stuff, and he'd been talking to Joe Casey. And he said, you guys are kind of thinking in similar directions. I think it would be really cool if you guys got together and like came up with a book together. And so that's what got it going, and me and Joe talked and put this together, and then we were rolling.
And then there's an obvious connection with the type of story he wanted to tell and the type of stories, like the style that you're known for. How did that work? Did you go Marvel method? Was it full script? What was how did that really work?
Yeah, we called it Marvel method. It was like our like understanding of Marvel method. Like it was super collaborative. Like especially in the beginning, like I was just like emptying my books. I was like, hey, how about this character? How about this character? How about that? How about that? And Joe was like throwing out his stuff. Like we were just kind of it was like a meeting of the minds, and super collaborative and figuring out what this thing, and then it kind of started to take shape. And then like the regular working process was that kind of like the Marvel method as described in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way or whatever, where it would be like somewhat loose script, and then I can kind of like riff whatever, and then Joe comes in at the end with like dialogue and stuff, but it's still pretty organic. I'd make my dialogue suggestions, he'd make his art. Maybe do like a little doodle or whatever, of like, oh, I was thinking this, maybe, like, so it was like it was like.
But as far as layouts, breakdowns, that's all you.
Yeah. I'd say that's pretty close to 100% me.
Okay, great. So after, Godland was published for years, right? That
the longest, like the longest running, like the most number of issues of anything I've done. Like I think it ran like 8 years or something.
Yeah, I remember, and I believe that was prime time when I owned my comic book store, and I sold plenty of it. Honestly, more than I expected to.
Yeah.
And constantly was surprised. It wasn't humongous. It wasn't X-Men numbers or something like that, but for an indie book, and especially one that didn't look like all the other indie books, let's put it that way, out there.
Yeah,
it sold extremely well. It's a lot better than those books in my store.
I have a lot of nostalgia for that period, and it is like the early 2000s or whatever, and like a ton of nostalgia for, and that was like a really interesting period for comics, because it was like we were coming out of like the late 90s, early 2000s of like, what is comics anymore? Like you had like the Marvel bankruptcy and all this, and it's like comics was like rebuilding into, and so it was like I sort of came to Image Comics like around the same time as like Robert Kirkman and stuff like that. So it was like like seeing that thing turn into the freight train, and that it became. And
did he ever go anywhere? You guys started the same.
I haven't heard from him lately. Yeah. What's he doing?
He won't return my emails, so I don't know.
Yeah, but it was just like this really cool, like just seeing like where where comics is at now and where it was at then, and like where I was at then and where I am.
Yeah. Kirkman is one of those guys that amazes me, because it's like he did it all after people said comics were dying and dead and it's gone and whatever, who can get rich with comics, who can make a big hit with comics anymore that's not a Marvel or DC clone superheroes? And he just said, dude, I can. And he did it. I love it.
There's a lot of opportunity in those kind of eras. And I feel like, even like now, this might be an era where there's a ton of opportunity, because if something is like seems dead or is almost dead or maybe is dead or has collapsed or what, like once it's like, it is like getting in on the ground floor. Like you are sort of coming in with like, and that's how it was when I started making comics. There really wasn't a comics industry. Like it was in, and everybody I talked to who was in comics was like, oh yeah, it's over. It's done.
Exactly. Like they're saying right now, right? Just like they said in the 90s, just like when I bought my comic book store, they said that. Like in 2000, right when the Spider-Man movie came out, I'm like, I just have a feeling that comic book movies are going to do pretty good. Like the special effects are there now, the creative acceptance is there, the right directors are coming and getting, the material. And I just said, I think, I'll bet you superhero movies. And I even made a prediction. I said, I hope they don't take over the movie industry the way they took over the comic industry, like that genre. And they did.
Yeah, they really did. Yeah, so like you could almost think of like the superhero genre as like a virus. And it like affects like whatever the host is. And the host was comics for all these years. And then it jumped to like to television, and so it's just taken over everything. And really the only thing that like slowed it down was this like current moment, this like just like this everything being on hold is what
right.
And maybe something else will be able to like sort of grow after.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the excuse me, the elephant. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Wait. Okay. Yeah. So the elephant in the room, right, is right now business is disrupted. We got a business apocalypse happening, right? Yeah. Like, but like Alan Moore taught us, like apocalypse doesn't necessarily mean it's over, right? It means a new beginning. So like, how do you see it? You are published, you're working for publishers, right? You're doing licensed stuff as well as your own stuff. But do you see crowdfunding significantly in your future? Is that a something that you plan to explore?
I mean, it's always been an option, and I've had like moments where I came really close to doing it, and sort of something else happened, and I ended up like not doing it. But it's there, and like maybe that's the future. Maybe that becomes something that like every cartoonist has to do. For the time being, I'm trying to like take as much advantage of like every other way of doing things other than that, just because like
right.
I don't want to be folding and stapling and putting together like so much respect to the people who do that, but it's like that's the longer I can put that stuff off, the better, because I've done that. I have
totally. And that's all time you could be drawing or working on your skills or doing whatever.
Maximize my creative time and minimize everything else. But maybe, there was a time when I was like, okay, I'm not going to engage in social media or whatever. But then like it soon became apparent that it was just kind of a necessity for, being a cartoonist. I saw the necessity of it. And so I, that into my business model. So maybe this is, maybe that. So yeah, like I'm open to it. But
Tom, I'll tell you, the internet. You know what the internet does? It kills middlemen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's what it does. It slays middlemen, and it brings the consumer closer to the producer. The further we go along, right? Distribution can go away, and publishers can go direct to the consumer. That's cutting out one layer. And now it's totally feasible for the publisher to be gone and for you to go directly to the consumer as well. But there's trade-offs, right? That's a whole set of skills that you have to balance on top of your cartooning and your art skills. You got to have this whole other high-level set of skills to run a business.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.